Good evening. I want to welcome you all to Chambers this evening. We are holding our first hearing to learn more about our proposed mobile food vendor pilot program. Just want to make sure that all of you who are interested in speaking know that there are speaker slips at the doors of Chambers, and we'll be accepting speaker slips until 5:30 this evening. Again, thanking everyone who's here and all of our guests as well as our presenters this evening, who I'll thank a little later. And I also want to start off by recognizing Councilmember Craig, who's joined us, and we have Nancy Sully from Councilmember Paley's office, and also John Oswald from Councilmember Klein's office. Again, thank everyone for tuning in, those who are here and those who are watching on television. I want to start off by thanking Director of Public Safety Mitchell J. Brown, Assistant Director Amanda Ford, Support Services Administrator Ramona Patz, License Manager Sharon Gadd, Kelly Hikes, Council Legislative Advisor. These folks have been working very, very hard to get us to the point to where we are this evening, and I want to thank them for all of their time and energy trying to build what we consider a good source of data to inform permanent legislation, and that's the purpose of the pilot program. And with all legislation and all other tasks and duties under public safety, our number one goal is to maintain public safety for the citizens in the great city of Columbus. I want to give a little bit of more background related to the mobile food vendor pilot program in terms of how we arrived at this evening's hearing in terms of this pilot program. Council has held 2 stakeholders meetings with members of the Central Ohio Food Truck Association, the Central Ohio Restaurant Association, and the Short North Alliance. Additionally, members of CAFTA allowed me to take tours of their trucks and spoke to me about their daily operations and what is all involved in running a food truck successfully in the city of Columbus, as well as identifying some of their challenges and barriers that they are facing in operating their business. From this experience and a few other experiences, I began to better understand the food truck industry and some of their difficulties that maybe our current laws impose on their ability to carry out their work on a day-to-day basis. We've examined, listened, and watched from other cities attempting to deal with this growing and certainly in-demand industry throughout other cities and states in this country. Many have had some successes, others continue to face challenges. I think slowing down our process to permanent legislation and putting in place this pilot program will give us a chance to find a workable and equitable temporary solution to this problem. At our first stakeholders meeting, several offices of council worked with the staff from public safety and public service to devise a mobile food vendor pilot program that addressed concerns raised at the first meeting. It is certainly our hope that this pilot program will be the start of permanent legislation and that the public will remain engaged with us throughout this process. The stakeholder meetings that we have already held are not the final and end all to our meetings with stakeholders. We certainly plan to have more meetings with stakeholders throughout the pilot program as a check-in to see how things are going as we continue to monitor any trends or data and feedback that we highly encourage all members and all stakeholders to provide to us during this time of the pilot program. And so without further ado, what most people are tuning in and here to hear about are more details related to the pilot program. And I would first ask Director Brown if he would like to offer any opening comments, and ask that he turn the floor over to Amanda Ford, Assistant Director of Public Safety, so we can begin a discussion related to the details of this exciting pilot program. Director Brown.
Good evening, Safety Chair Mills and Herschel Craig, again, Council Member. Thank you very much for being here this evening. Members of Council who also may be showing up later on, we are excited to be here this evening to present the Mobile Food Vendor Pilot Program. With me today, as has already been stated, is Amanda Ford, the Assistant Director of Public Safety, Ramona Patz, our Support Services Administrator, and Sharon Gadd, the License Manager. The food truck industry has grown tremendously over the past few years in the city of Columbus. We see them parked on the street, on private property, and at food truck gatherings, and at multiple special events throughout the city. They have become the trendy restaurant serving gourmet food with the ability to move from location to location and key in on areas that are profitable and appeal to the needs of their followers. And to top it all off, followers can track their favorite food truck through social media and websites. The reality is, however, we must find a reasonable way to regulate food trucks just as we have done with other forms of mobile food vending, such as push carts. Creating a balance between the needs of the industry and business and the community is no easy task. Our goal is to work with these stakeholders to craft legislation and throughout the process ensure the safety of our citizens. Our response, a mobile food vending pilot program. We need to test a few ideas to determine what will work and what won't work, and how all of this impacts the city of Columbus. By creating a pilot program, this will provide the industry with an opportunity to legally park at designated metered and unmetered locations that will accommodate the oversized parking. In order for the city to implement this pilot program, Safety will be asking City Council to temporarily suspend Columbus City Code 2151.16 as applied to the mobile food vendors. This section currently prohibits individuals from engaging in commercial sales for more than 15 minutes in the street. This is crucial to the implementation so that vendors are operating within the code. Most importantly, working with stakeholders, city staff, and feedback from the community, Safety will have the necessary information to create a comprehensive new code section that addresses the mobile food vending industry. I will now turn over to Amanda Ford, who is the project manager, to share with you the details of this pilot.
Good evening, Safety Chair Mills, Councilmember Craig. When we first started talking about mobile food vending, the first thing we talked about was how do we define mobile food vending? Definition: a food establishment that is located upon a vehicle located upon a vehicle or which is pulled by a vehicle where food or beverage is cooked, prepared, and or served for individual portion service, such as a mobile food kitchen. This includes food trucks, trailers, push carts, and ice cream trucks. As we move forward, obviously we want to stick with that same definition. It's very similar to Columbus Public Health definition as well, so we wanted to be consistent with how they were defining it. To give an overview of the pilot, basically the pilot will begin on June 1st and end December 31st. Working with Public Service, we have identified roughly 20 metered spots in the downtown, Arena District, and Short North areas. We're working with Clintonville, Harrison West, the campus area, and Near East to secure unmetered locations. The designated locations will accommodate a vehicle up to 25 feet to assure that vehicular and pedestrian traffic is not obstructed. Selling is permitted each day from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. We want to assure that the vehicles actually vacate those spots each day. This will help assure that everyone has a fair chance to park at one of these spots. All mobile food vehicles, with the exception of licensed push carts, will be required to obtain a temporary mobile food vendor license that will expire on December 31st. Licensed push carts are exempt because they already have completed the requirements to obtain the temporary mobile food because they are licensed through our license section. Currently, food trucks and trailers are only required to obtain a food service operation license and pass a health inspection by the issuing health department. As part of our licensing process, each vehicle will be required to pass a safety inspection from Safety, Columbus Fire, and Columbus Public Health. They must obtain a commercial sales license and sign an affidavit stating that they have completed background checks on all of their employees or independent contractors and that none of these employees are in violation of the criminal offenses defined in our commercial sales code. They must also provide proof that they have insurance on the vehicle. The temporary mobile food license and inspections for this pilot project are all being done for free. These inspections are taking place on a Saturday, on overtime, so we're committed to this pilot and making sure that these vehicles are safe. The only cost that's being passed on to the vendors is the commercial sales license and the related fees, which will cost approximately $197 for them to obtain that license. And finally, the pilot will have no impact on special events, street closures, or those operating on private property. For special events, vendors will still need to work with the promoter to participate in those events. Some of the other additional operating guidelines: any and all parking restrictions that apply to the designated spots will apply as they're posted. For example, we have street sweeping signs, and then a lot of signs are posted with no parking during the morning and afternoon rush hour times. Parking meters must be paid during the enforcement hours, or vendors could face a parking violation. All designated spots are on a first-come, first-served basis and open to the general public. The reality is that this industry has a desire to be in trendy spots where parking is at a premium. If we start designating spots as mobile food vending only, it may create some animosity amongst the industry with the businesses and residents in those areas who struggle to find parking on a day-to-day basis. Vehicles may only serve to the sidewalk side of the vehicle so as to not impede traffic. Obviously, we don't want them trying to serve out the driver's side so that vehicles may potentially stop and try to get food and you're causing some congestion. Each vehicle is required to have a minimum of one 30-gallon trash receptacle or up to 3, including recycling. Obviously, we want to encourage recycling, but at this time for the pilot, it's not required. We realize that there have been several complaints in the Short North area about the trash resulting from mobile food vending, so that we're hoping by requiring the vendors to also carry trash receptacles that this will help with that issue. And then finally, no tables and chairs, no sidewalk dining is permitted unless they're operating on private property. We realize that parking along the street is not ideal for push carts, so obviously we know they'll continue to operate on the sidewalk where they're allowed to be, but we feel that we could not exclude them from participating in this pilot. They'll be allowed to operate in the designated spots, but are required to park as close to the curb as possible, place traffic cones along the edge of the parking spot, and wear a safety vest to increase visibility. Finally, vehicles are not permitted to park on the sidewalk with the exception of licensed push carts. We have received several complaints that food trucks are parking on the sidewalks. The reality is sidewalks are not built to hold the weight of that truck, nor can typically ADA requirements be met. You'll see up here is a list of the current oversized parking metered spots that have been identified. There's probably, I think there's 18 to 20 on here. And just as I mentioned before, we'll continue to work with Harrison West, Clintonville, the campus area, and the Near East to identify unmetered spots that can accommodate oversized vehicle. I know a few of the council aides are actually attending neighborhood meetings over the next 2 weeks trying to gain that community support so that we can move forward with identifying those spots. So thank you for allowing them to go. And take care of that for me. On to the markings. All designated spots will be marked with a silver star. Obviously, we don't want to do anything permanent for the pilot, so this was the easiest solution that Public Service had come up with. The stars will be placed on the actual parking meter pole, or for unmetered spots, the pavement markings will be placed on the ground. The parking at undesignated spots. Vendors could face a parking violation. In suspending Code 215116 as it relates to mobile food vending, it only suspends it for those participating in those designated spots. So others are required to park on private property. The vehicle could be towed if the operator is not present with the vehicle or refuses to move the vehicle. And if the licensed vehicle is found to be parking in a non-designated spot, police, parking violations, or our license section have the ability to remove their temporary mobile food license decal, and the vendor will no longer be able to participate in the pilot program. The most important thing we need is feedback. This is crucial as we create this legislation that works for Columbus. It's important to hear from our mobile food vendors, the businesses, residents who are affected by the pilot, obviously police and fire and public service, and just the community in general. So more importantly, when we look to police and fire, we need to make sure that our emergency responders can still get down those streets where those vehicles are parked. Obviously I know a lot of them are on the corners, especially along High Street. It's going to be crucial that they're still able to respond in a timely manner without, being impacted by those food trucks. So in the end, we need to hear the good, the bad, comments, suggestions. We want the feedback. We have created a mobile food vending email address to make it easy for people. You can email mfv@columbus.gov, and we will collect all the comments and review them as we continue to draft legislation and respond appropriately when needed to. If you have a comment about a particular vehicle, I would encourage people to make sure they write down the decal number, get the business name, time, date, location, as much information as possible so that if there's an issue with enforcement, we can take care of that at a later date. And also, I'd encourage you, all of us have cell phones, take a picture of it, include it in the email so that we can see that picture. And finally, we'll be meeting with stakeholders throughout this process to get their input. Our timeline, I think we sent out more than 500 packets to those who are considered some type of mobile food vending. That went out on Friday, May 3rd, which included a lot of information about the pilot program. Obviously, we have our public hearing tonight. Inspections for these vehicles are scheduled for May 18th and May 31st. Stakeholder meetings will take place in July and September. And obviously, we're looking to meet with the mobile food industry separately from businesses and communities so that everybody has an opportunity to talk freely without, just to avoid any confrontations and, if somebody's having a poor experience. And then obviously our goal is to have this legislation done and in place at the end of the year, beginning of January 2014. Obviously, the keys to a successful pilot, education is the number one thing we can do. The vendors received their packets. License section started receiving calls today from many of them with questions, but it included, a letter from you and the safety director with the basics about their inspections, the pilot itself, all the designated locations. It included the application for their commercial sales, the temporary mobile food vending. It even included inspection sheets that they're going to be required to pass. So we tried to provide them as much information as we could. Obviously, the businesses working with the Short North Alliance, they're probably the most impacted by the pilot. So working with the Short North Alliance, we sent a letter to them and asked them to forward that to all their businesses so that they would also have the information. Obviously, the communities, we'll have the council aides going out to the communities that we're focusing on right now for the unmetered spots. But if they have questions, they're always welcome to reach out to us and we'll take care of any of their concerns. And then police, obviously Ramona and I will be meeting with all of our patrol commanders in the next week to 2 weeks to give them a detailed outline of the pilot. And we met with police and fire, their command staffs today, and kind of ran through it briefly with them so that they had a general idea of what was going on as well. But we'll also meet with our 911 call center to make sure that as any calls for service related to mobile food vending come in, that's tracked in the CAD system so that as we're pulling some of that data, we can see, if there's any issues related to the police or fire have had to respond to in relation to mobile food vending. In the end, we need vendors to follow the guidelines. That's probably a crucial piece as well. If the guidelines are not followed, it makes it really tough to, encourage good legislation and not put more restrictions on them. So our goal is for them to participate. And we need vendors, businesses, and community members and city staff to be open-minded to the possibilities. The reality is mobile food vending is here to stay. So we have to figure out how we're going to make that work in the city. And finally, once again, the feedback is crucial to the success of this pilot. Some may ask, why a pilot? Obviously, the answer is we need to create legislation that works, that's enforceable, and doesn't impact the safety of our residents. That's the key piece to all of this. So in order for us to do that, there's a few key questions that have to be answered. Do parking at spots work? Based on the location and size, can traffic still maneuver around? Where do we need to expand? Where's the demand? Are owners fighting over spots? That is going to be a critical response that we're going to require from police, is we need to know if vendors are arguing on street corners and police are being called in to handle that dispute. Is the setup manageable? Can it be done citywide, and is it enforceable? Are there additional safety concerns that maybe we're not thinking of? And what are the unanticipated consequences? So many factors will come into place as we evaluate this pilot. We are hopeful that vendors will follow the guidelines and that we have provided, and that Columbus can continue to enjoy the amazing food that many of these vendors provide. So that's a quick summary of it. So thank you for your time tonight, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. I have quite a few. I'm going to offer Councilmember Craig the opportunity to ask any questions you have at this time. Okay, I wanted to, a couple of will probably appear as more as comments than questions in terms of reiterating that consequences of the pilot program could result in losing the temporary license because we have to make sure that the rules of the pilot program are observed and there's a reason that they're in place. So it's not a park anywhere, do whatever, ignore the parking laws, all of those things because I have a temporary license and I'm in a pilot program. That's not the end all. Participating in festivals and other events, all of that will still stay in place in terms of paying the organizer the fee and being a part of that will all still take place. If you could add a little bit more to that, I just want to make sure that we reiterate that important comment.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the reality is special events have always been a little different. Mobile food vending has always been welcomed in that for those events. So they just have to work with the promoter to make sure that they're still following all the rules and regulations for those events. So they don't have to have this temporary mobile food license to participate in those special events, just if they want to participate in our pilot. So we would encourage them to still work with the special event coordinators and make sure that they're abiding by all those rules.
Thank you. I'm going to stop here between my questions and comments to remind our audience that there are 10 minutes remaining. And if you have the desire to speak on our topic this evening, please find the speaker slips at the opening of chambers. And my aide will come down and receive those speaker slips, and we will begin public testimony at the conclusion of our question and answers. Just another question in terms of the comment of serving from the sidewalk side and not the street side, that those who have a truck that is orientated in a different way will need to locate the spots that are on a one-way street, such as Front Street, if that is the way that their truck is designed. Is that correct?
Yes, obviously we don't want them serving to the side to where it could potentially congest traffic. The reality is we don't want somebody waiting on their food and tying up traffic. So we will require that they try to find a spot, like you said, on Front Street that's one way where they can park on either side of the street.
Thank you. And I appreciate the comment that they're here, because they are here and they're in high demand. And we want those who can start a small business, such as a food truck or a push cart or any of those, that they have the opportunity and that they're welcomed in the city, begin their new business in the city, and trying to make it a business-friendly piece of legislation, and also realizing that the food scene in our city of Columbus is critical to tourism. And so we have to begin to make sure that we have good representation in that area so that we can continue to support tourism and draw folks to our city, which benefits all of us. I want to move again to the future meetings with stakeholders. We want to hear from all stakeholders, not just those who are owners or operators of food trucks or customers. We want to hear from businesses and residents, because we know that there may be some unanticipated consequences, disturbances, or the like to some of our residents. But we want to hear from you as we go through this, so it helps us inform permanent legislation. I also want to make sure that we talk about the markings one more time, just to be sure that what they saw on the screen is the mark, and that's what should be identifying. Would you share a little bit more?
Like I said earlier, we didn't want to do anything that was permanent, in the off chance that some of the locations that we've chosen may not work specifically for the mobile food vending. So each of the metered spots, you'll find a silver star. They'll be installed right before the pilot starts. Obviously, they have not done any of that yet, but it'll be something temporary that will at least mark that meter, so that the vendors will know what meters have been approved for the mobile food project or for the pilot. Our goal is to also educate residents as well, so that they know that, but the reality is the spots are open, first come, first serve. But, the reality is they'll all have that silver star. But the pavement markings will be a little tougher to see, I think, for those, if you already have a food truck parked there. But that'll be, part of the issue with making sure that those trucks and trailers and push carts know where these spots are at. So when they come in for their inspections on May 18th, we're hoping to have a complete list of designated areas, so they'll know exactly where they can go, and provide them a map of where those spots are at, so that they can drive around and, that week before the pilot and start seeing some of those stars appear.
And the hours are there for rotation, so that there's equity in terms of the access to prime spots for all of the folks in the mobile food vending industry.
We had talked about whether to limit the times, and we know that, that was one thing the industry said they didn't want time limits on those spots. So the reality is we just need them to make sure they're vacating each day. So we cut the time off at 3 a.m. So from 3 to 6, at least any residents living in that area, things will be a little quieter, at least for a few hours of the night. But we wanted to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity to participate and get some of those key locations where they all want to be.
And if you could share again the hours for the inspections. And I just want to remind everyone that we are putting resources to this day to make it convenient, starting very early, and also making sure that all of those who need to conduct inspections of the food truck itself, safety and health, all in one place for this day. So if you could go over the hours for May 18th and location, I appreciate it.
On May 18th, it'll be on a first-come, first-served basis out at our fleet facility on Groves Road. We'll start at 7:30 in the morning and run till approximately 4 p.m. So we'll take the last truck about 3:30. So we would encourage trucks to get there early to make sure that they get all of their inspections taken care of, because we realize a lot of them, it's a Saturday, and that they have places that they need to be. So we'll have health representation there, safety, Columbus Fire will be there. We'll be able to take in their mobile food application at that time, get that processed. If they pass all their inspections, they'll get their decal that day. If they don't pass their inspections, they can make an appointment to come to our licensing facility on Piedmont on May 31st, schedule an appointment for that afternoon for their re-inspection. So then they'll only be required to get inspected for what they didn't pass. So it is a lot of time and energy that's gone into it. We're trying to accommodate, a lot of trucks, but also, bringing in laptops and different things that we're going to need to process those applications. So our entire license section will be there, working hard on a Saturday, and hopefully it won't be too long of a day for them. But I think we can pull this off. It's a quick turnaround, and we realize that it's going to be a challenge for some of our vendors as well. But we just ask that they be patient and work with us through this licensing process.
Okay, and I want to also, again, reiterate, I know through the many discussions we've had on this topic that we've talked about trying to design the pilot so that it's reflective in a way that gives us data that says it can be replicated citywide. And so understanding that the short north may be over impacted, but it gives us a good snapshot. In addition to our other high residential areas, will give us a snapshot of what it could look like to replicate throughout the city, intentionally not choosing a single unique area like a university area that we don't have throughout the city. Wouldn't give us information about what would work in other neighborhoods in our city, and the design of neighborhoods and parking spots, not to mention the difficulty of locating oversized spots, was also taken in consideration before impacting neighborhoods. And still working with the commissions going forward to talk about the unmetered spots in those neighborhoods. And that'll give us some sense that it can be replicated, because as we do here every single Monday, it's legislation that impacts the entire city and not just one neighborhood. Did you want to share any more about the design in terms of the neighborhood choices?
We talked a lot about where to start this pilot project, and, we all felt like, I know that industry really wants to be in the short north. On the weekends, it's a hop-in area. It's where everything's going on. So we felt like that was probably going to be the biggest struggle, is how to place them in there without impeding traffic too much, without impeding pedestrian traffic. We know we don't have wide sidewalks. The line of sight can often be difficult. So we felt like if we could make it work in the short north, we could make it a little more adaptable to other areas in town. So we realize there's always going to be some challenges, but we feel like short north is our biggest challenge, because you do have so many residents living there. You've got so many businesses, and parking's already so limited there that so many people get frustrated because they can't find spots there. So we don't want to add to that frustration, but we still want to accommodate the need for the food trucks there as well.
Thank you. And I also wanted to ask if you'll share, when someone sends an email to this designated email address, who and what department is monitoring the information sent to the email?
The email will go to our license section, so they will all have access to this email. And obviously, if it's something that's more appropriate for our office to respond to, we can do that. If it's something more appropriate for council to respond to, we'll send it to obviously your representatives. And but we'll make sure that it's looked at on a daily basis, and that those that need a response will get a response from our license section.
Okay, I will offer Councilmember Craig another opportunity for questions or comments.
Don't have a question, but rather an observation. I wanted to acknowledge your leadership, Chair Mills, on this initiative. I certainly wanted to thank Director Brown and Assistant Director Ford and Ms. Platt and others. This is a very, very serious issue. I mean, it's the delicate balance of, and you've already said it, continuing to have a business-friendly city while balancing our public safety and food safety issues, and certainly the impact in the community. And so I'm very interested in hearing from public testimony on this as we continue to move forward. I think the pilot is critical to get a sense for where we're going, particularly with regard to any future legislation. So thank you for your work, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our residents and the business owners regarding this issue.
Thank you, Councilmember Craig, and as always, I appreciate you coming to the hearing to hear directly the information. I'm sure those who are in attendance are appreciative as well. Again, I want to thank the folks who've been working hard on this. Thank you, Assistant Director Ford. You've just done a tremendous job, and I know it's not been easy. Consensus building among a variety of stakeholders is not easy, but it's meaningful and important, and I think that's what makes good, sound policy, is engaging more than just our own selves and thinking about what works for the city of Columbus. All great minds make for a great city. So thank you again for that. And now it is now time for our public testimony, our last order of business at today's hearing. I'm going to start with, in order of receipt of the speaker slips, and as I always do, I start off by apologizing for any mispronunciations of any names. Please charge it to my head and not my heart. It is certainly not my intention to mispronounce your name. I will do the best that I can, but I ask that you forgive me in advance. If you will please approach the podium when your name is called, and remind everyone that you have 3 minutes, and I will try to allow you to finish and not interrupt you with questions. So please use all of your 3 minutes to share your comments or questions, and then there'll be time for me to respond after you've provided your testimony. I'm going to first ask Matthew Higgins to the podium. Mr. Higgins, please state your name and please repronounce it if I have done so incorrectly. And please identify any organization that you are representing. And thank you for coming to tonight's hearing on mobile food vendors.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. Also, Mr. Craig, it's good to see you again. Every opportunity that I have to say thank you for the direction that you gave me when I was a much younger man, pointing me towards service. And you sitting on this council actually serves as a reinforcement of that. My name is Matt Higgins. I am here representing Swoop Food Group. We operate a food truck as well as a cart, crepe salad cart, in the city of Columbus. I'm here to talk today for a few minutes about preparation. Any organization really has a need to plan. That's not really a secret. It's really the key to success to get anything done. Our businesses, the restaurant business, is fiercely dependent on planning. We have to plan staff for all the locations that we're going to be at. We have to decide what food we're going to take there, how we're going to sell it, provide it hot, like the service material and where, when we're going to leave. There are a lot of things that we have to take into consideration. The projected sales, where we're going to be. If we take too much food and we prepare for 100 people and 15 people show up, we have a serious issue. If we take food for 15 people and 100 people show up, we have probably a bigger issue. A combination of all these things are what contribute to our success, or the success of any endeavor. I moved back here from D.C. about a year ago to do this. When I was there, I got the opportunity to see the way their mobile food program was set up. It really put the vendors in a situation where very first thing in the morning, they packed up and loaded out. They brought their staff, that have an expected amount of hours and the amount of food that they purchased to operate, and they went to the designated locations where they were allowed to set up. There are some changes being made in the legislation now, but at the time, what you really saw in the morning was just a big game of musical chairs, where around the squares where the trucks were going to be most profitable and allowed to park, the trucks would circle the park until it was time for them to be able to serve. And then they would all cram into the spaces that they could get. And the people that were not able to get into those spaces had to push on off to a less profitable place or perhaps even home. At that point, we're in a situation where all the planning that we've done on a daily basis has kind of gone to naught. So what I'm here, I guess, to ask to be added or to be considered at the end of the pilot or perhaps in the pilot would be some sort of system of reservation. That allows us to plan. We know that we're going to be in this place from this time. until that time, so that the amount of people that I need to have on the truck to sell food is there. The amount of food that I need to operate during those hours is there. It gives me an opportunity to not find myself in conflict with my fellow mobile vendors over a space that they got to first, or the fact that I might just be better that I have to go home for the day. And I think probably more important for this body is that a system of reservation, I think, would make the data received from this pilot more accurate and more dependable. So thank you.
Mr. Higgins, if you could return to the podium, I just have one question.
Sure.
If you could elaborate, and I think I'm hearing you clearly, but I just want to make sure, a system reservation, is that to reserve a spot throughout the city?
Well, we have, we have the spaces that are going to be provided for the pilot. It would be valuable for all of the businesses that are involved in the pilot to have the opportunity to reserve one of those spaces, because it gives us an opportunity to plan our week and make sure that we are conserving, our money in an industry where the margins are specifically very thin.
And the system reservation would reserve a spot of the designated spots that you're speaking of? Is that what you're discussing?
That is correct.
Okay, not just a specific area.
Not just a specific area.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have Tracy Hunt. If you will please approach the podium, state your full name, and please identify any organization that you represent. You have 3 minutes. I know it seems like we're all really close, but it is difficult to hear in this space. The acoustics are a little bit more challenging. If you could adjust the microphone so that I could hear you, that would be wonderful.
Tracy Hunt from the Pickled Swine Food Truck, and I'm here with COFTA. And if I can just respectfully decline my request then, because I want to make sure that I just want to make sure that we were all able to make points that COFTA wanted to make. And so since I know that there's not a limit of people that are going to speak, that was my kind of point, that I wanted to be able to cover some of my other food truck owners in case they weren't able to get here in time. But they're all here, so I respectfully...
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. Next, I have Laura Lee. If you would please state your first and last name and identify any organizations that you represent. You have 3 minutes to speak to us on a topic of mobile food vendor. Hi.
Good evening.
How
My
are
name
you?
is Laura Lee. I am a member of the Central Ohio Food Truck Association. I'm also the chef owner of Ajumama, a food truck here in Columbus. We appreciate the hard work that the council members and their staffs, as well as the city departments, have put into this proposal for a food truck pilot program, as well as the opportunity to speak to you this evening. In particular, I'll be speaking to you about the part of the proposal that would limit participating trucks to 25 feet. Of our current membership, close to 40% of the trucks exceed the 25-foot requirement, including mine, but none exceed 30 feet. Since the parking spaces that have been chosen appear to be end spaces, these member trucks could comfortably fit despite being over 25 feet. Part of the reason I moved back to Columbus from San Diego to start my business was I saw a more welcoming atmosphere to businesses in Columbus. We thankfully do not have the same overbearing restrictions on businesses that California has, along with a very pro-business and pro-food truck mayor. Columbus is in the position to benefit from a boon in this small business. Since we did not have any length restrictions at the time, on trucks at the time, I purchased the size truck that best fit my needs as well as being manageable. A larger truck meant more capacity, more room to take the Ajumama vision to the streets, and a more comfortable working environment for the more than one full-time employee I hope to have someday. Now I find myself faced with an investment that I cannot utilize to the fullest, nor would I be able to sell easily to another Columbus-based entrepreneur when the time comes for us to grow into a brick-and-mortar restaurant. Councilwoman Mills, you said it yourself yesterday to NBC4 that food critics have taken notice of Columbus's fast-growing mobile food vendor community. We really moved up our food profile as a city, and it is likely connected to the growth of food trucks. I know my own press has included USA Today, ONN, the Korean Herald, and potentially a national daytime talk show as of this morning. I also received a nod in the Nightline segment about that food truck, which is another one of our member trucks that is over 25 feet. To limit the growth of a truck by restricting its size at the city level will hurt the quality of the industry in Columbus, as well as the diversity. In closing, for our residents as well as our visitors, I hope the council will reconsider this requirement of the pilot program. Allowing the current larger trucks as well as future trucks will bring the culinary visions as well as the diversity of young, passionate chefs and local entrepreneurs to the streets of Columbus.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, and thank you for the tour on your truck. I really appreciated it, and you certainly gave me some insight from that day, so I appreciate, and now we're here at a different place, and again, appreciating your time to come down and share comments. Amanda, would you like to speak a little bit more on terms of our thoughts and conversations on the length restrictions that we have in the pilot?
Yeah, when we sat down with Public Service to discuss the issue of what could fit in that oversized parking, the longest they said was probably 25 feet. The reality is, because we still have to make sure, because most of these spots are located near the intersection. They're kind of that last or first spot on the street. So the reality is, if the trucks get any larger than the 25 feet, they will start to impede the line of sight for pedestrians and vehicular traffic. So they get way too close to that intersection and they start blocking off crosswalks and make it difficult for people to see around those. So the reality is, we have to ensure the safety of our pedestrians and the vehicles traveling down those streets and trying to make turns. So that's why we stuck with the 25 feet, because, in conversations with service, we felt like that was still safe to fit in there. They're probably still going to overhang that parking spot a little bit at 25 feet, but there was still enough room to accommodate that.
And are you speaking only of metered or both metered and unmetered?
Specifically the metered spots. I know the unmetered, we're still trying to work out on what that will accommodate. So there could potentially be some room for that on the unmetered, but definitely on the metered, I think we're going to have to stick with the 25 feet just so we're not impeding the traffic.
And so, Ms. Lee, what I would say to you is that as we continue to work with the neighborhoods on the unmetered spaces, we have that conversation and we'll get back to you related to the restrictions for the unmetered spaces.
But as I understand it, if I show up for that inspection on the 18th and I am over 25 feet, I will be denied the license.
Assistant Director.
Before the 18th, we'll look at the issue of the unmetered. Hopefully we'll have that resolved, hopefully next week. I don't remember when the community meetings are, but so hopefully we'll have that resolved and be able to provide some feedback on that.
I'll share a little light on that. So we have a meeting, one this evening and one next week. We should have the neighborhoods. Hopefully, again, community will is important. We should have those conversations and hopefully approval for those spaces so that by the 18th, we know which neighborhoods are welcoming and be able to share the information before. And as long as you're on the list of the package, you'll get all the information that we're sending out. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I have William Hunt. Mr. Hunt, if you will approach the podium and share your first and last name and any organizations that you may represent. Welcome to Council.
Thank you. I'm William Hunt, and I am Tracy's husband, and we are the owners and operators of The Pickled Swine. And I am an interior trim carpenter, cabinet builder by trade, and was spit out by the industry and had to start over, and Columbus is a great place to start over. I am also concerned with Laura's length because if she is expected to carry the same license as everybody else, all of a sudden she's only allowed to use unmetered spaces, if that's what I'm hearing that we would talk about, because then the metered spaces are out of 30% of our trucks are not allowed to use that then. It needs to be the same across the board for everybody. It either works or it doesn't. 30% not being able to participate is not fair. That's my main concern, is the length requirements and how it can be flexible, and also the fact that the spaces are going to be available to the general public as well. What's going to stop somebody from coming down and hitting that spot and waiting for us to roll up and then saying, yeah, you can have this spot for $100? Couldn't use extortion against us. available to the general public. So I think if the spaces are going to be in a pilot program, they should be only available to food trucks during the time at which we would be operating, lunch or evening or after the bars close or whatever the case may be. But to make them available to everybody, I think, is going to open up more than just fighting between truck owners. There's going to be fighting amongst general public and truck owners. But that's my concern.
Mr. Hunt, as I said, I don't want to interrupt your 3 minutes and cut you off, but are you?
I'm done.
Okay, all right. So I want to respond again by repeating, in part of my opening is to make sure everyone is aware that we are working very hard to work out an equitable solution. But at the end of the day, there's going to be some give and take that's going to be required in order to make this work for our entire city. All of those considerations will have to be taken into place. And I believe what Assistant Director Ford was talking about in line of sight is a safety issue. And as I talked about, that one of the major concerns and our number one goal is the safety of our public. That I have to regard first. Sure. And then try to do what we can to support other industries. Also in that are the residents who, for some, may not be interested in not having a parking space near their home or where they live or where they operate their business and solely given to another industry. We do have some challenge in parking throughout our city that we're working on, but that is the other side of that coin that I know it makes it difficult for you to see, but we do have to consider those who may want to park near their home or otherwise to just immediately take away parking from them. So again, it's the equitable in the solution that we're trying to work out and hope that the information that we gather through the pilot project will inform us so that when we make or move and hope for the support of our other council members on permanent legislation, we have enough data to say that this is working the best equitable solution that we can. And I will not apologize for regarding for public safety first, because that must be first. We have to have a safe city. So line of sight is a safety issue to speak to the length restrictions. And if we have people who can't see and making turns and crashes occur, we've got another situation. I think it's a much more grave, dangerous situation when that occurs. So I want to make sure that I'm clear again about our goal of public safety. That is of high regard. Also balancing residents who are as important as the folks in the food truck industry as well. Okay? Sure. Thank you, Mr. Hunt, for coming down. We look forward to your participation in the pilot program. Next, I have Matthew, and I'm missing the last part, Litzinger. If you will please approach the podium and share your first and last name and any organizations that you represent, I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Matthew Litzinger, and I'm chef owner of L'Antibes French Restaurant. It's located at the corner of Warren and Pearl Alley. My address is 772 North High Street. I'm in the rear of the building. I'm not actually on High Street. There are two locations to be that are in the works. One is located on the south side of Warren, and the other is located on the north side of Warren at the corner of Warren and Pearl. I invested a lot of energy and time and, frankly, money into a beautiful patio. The food truck would be not directly covering my patio, but a partial section of my patio. There's a beautiful view of downtown. I'm a big fan of food trucks. I've been all over the world. I've had street meat in the Philippines. You know, that's how they call it there, I guess. So I love food trucks. I do. I just think that there's a right place for every food truck. And I don't know, some of them may be noisy, some of them may not. Some of them may draw large crowds, some of them may not. So I'm here today to just share with you just sort of my anxiety about the food truck that will or could be located outside of my restaurant. I did some measurements and I did my research, and I got out with the tape measurer, and it would be at most 6 feet from any of my guests sitting outside. So I just obviously I have a concern about how that could manifest, what could happen. I'm here, so that's why I'm here today. It's just really about my restaurant. I wanted to touch a little bit about residents and the noise, if that's going to affect the people that live above my restaurant. I have about 10 parking spaces. We monitor it, and so, are we going to have trouble with cars pulling into the lot while I'm doing business to go eat at a food truck? The food truck on the south side of Warren, I'm happy that it's there. I don't think it will affect too many people at all. And I can't wait to go and try the food. So that's why I'm here, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Assistant Director Ford, because if I look correctly, Warren Street, east of High Street, there's 2 spots, and that is west and east.
I've not seen a map of the exact spots, so I'm trying to visualize it in my head. I know where your restaurant is at, but exactly where those trucks would be parked. So.
Thank you. Which is,
I believe we're being shared the meter number.
Yeah.
But in terms of whether that's east or west.
Right.
193 is one, I think, and the other is...
I don't know my meter numbers throughout the city. I apologize. I don't know all the meter numbers.
I want to be fair so that we can move to all of the public testimony.
Right.
So a part of that is to make sure that I take note of your concern and to also get clarity so that I understand your concern. And that's what I'm trying to ascertain from Assistant Director Ford, that they're east and west. And please let me know once you can determine whether they're east and west so that we can make a decision related to that. And the concern of the view and where the truck is situated in terms of where that spot is located was your other concern? The view from your restaurant, your patio view?
It's just the crowd, the people, the noise. I mean, all of which I think is a good thing. Traffic, it maybe would I think is very positive for the neighborhood to just generate more focus on the short north. I just hope that we strategically plan places that aren't directly beside a restaurant. So a food truck, I don't want to say on top of my restaurant, but really beside my restaurant, rather very close. And so I feel that businesses should all businesses, all food trucks, whatever, should plan in a way to sort of disperse themselves so that we're not having, in essence, a food truck is a restaurant. So we're not having a restaurant on top of another restaurant. I don't know if that's something that is feasible, but I think that is just going to be good for the neighborhood and the people and the businesses that are there. So.
Thank you. I think I have it in terms of location of the spot related to your restaurant and the proximity to your restaurant. Again, I want to make sure that everyone understands this is a pilot to sort of give us real-time data of what those unanticipated consequences may be related to the pilot, so that when we move into something more permanent, if there have been some consequences while we're learning, we're asking for a lot of patience, and I understand what we're asking of the community, but it is to give us a more idea of a permanent location and how we can best support all. It is very tough to reach an equitable solution, but we will do the best we can and learn and explore and examine to the point where we can really make sure that this is something that supports more than just one industry. Thank you for coming to council.
Okay,
I appreciate it. Next, I have Mr. Joe Bush. If you would please approach the podium, state your first and last name and any organization that you represent.
Hello, my name is Joe Bush. I work for Mikey's Late Night Slice food truck, and I'm also here on behalf of COFTA, the Central Ohio Food Truck Association. I'd like to thank everyone for their efforts in bringing us to this point, as food trucks are growing in popularity around Columbus. I just have one major point that I'd like to point out in the pilot program, and that's my concern with the limited number of designated spots. I do realize it is just a pilot program, but as it expands, I think that limiting and designating spots for food vendors will threaten a food truck's ability to be consistent in that by designating spots, you immediately limit the playing field as far as where a truck can go. I understand that food trucks should not have free reign, and I do appreciate, the thought behind the spaces concerning public safety and neighborhood interests. But I personally think that perhaps setting parameters might be more conducive in an equitable solution. My example would be Late Night Slice has spent the better part of 3 years establishing itself in the Short North neighborhood. It has done so with permission from the nearby restaurants, both Level Dining Lounge and Rigsby's. It has followed traffic laws in that we pay for the meter spaces that we take up. We're not obstructing obstructing traffic in that area. And we've done so, again, without, I guess, the added regulation. And so we're successful at this location because of our commitment to this location. We're there consistently, Thursday through Saturday, again, for the past 3 years. And I think limiting the number of spots and giving all of these food vendors only a specific number of places they can be will greatly increase potentially hostile tensions between food vendors. And so I think instead of saying where a food truck can be, just again setting parameters into what a space should be like. That's my main concern: setting parameters over designated spaces.
Can you elaborate on what spaces should be like? That's the part that I think I was struggling with.
I guess, I agree with having a length requirement, again, as per public safety. I agree with having, agreement between affected nearby businesses. For example, the restaurants, how they have their concerns for their customers. And I agree that, a truck should not be obstructing traffic. And so as long as it is meeting those requirements, or requirements that are set by the board, that a truck can still go and explore and find new places and potentially create demand there, and not necessarily just be stuck with the designated spots that have been set forth.
And I just want to make sure that for purposes of all that are viewing and listening audience and those present this evening, that we're talking about the public spaces and not the private spaces.
Or the metered spaces specifically.
Metered and unmetered spaces. Yep. But we're not talking about private property.
No, I understand that.
Which may be located, if you'll let me finish,
sorry.
Of that which will be located throughout the city, that there are arrangements with private property for access, which we don't legislate, but this is really about the public spaces and how we have to ensure that there's adequate parking for all residents, business owners, restaurants, and the like in terms of the parking spaces. But again, realizing that this is a pilot, and if that is a concern that you continue to see, I highly encourage you and everyone else to continue to send us that feedback so that then we know as we move forward. And I like the ideas of the solutions that you've put forth, because I think telling us what's wrong, but telling us what we could do is very helpful. So I appreciate your solutions offered. I really appreciate that. So thank you again for coming to council.
Thank you.
Next, I have Brian Reed. Brian, if you will approach the podium and state your first and last name and any organizations that you may represent.
Hello again.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
I'm Brian Reed, president of the Central Ohio Food Truck Association, and I also own a food truck called Mojo Tago that started in 2010. So, first off, I want to thank you all very much for the time you've given us. You clearly have listened to us throughout this process and have put quite a bit of work, obviously, into this program in a short amount of time. We appreciate it very much, and we want to continue working solution-based with you throughout this pilot to come up with some good answers. So we appreciate that. We had a meeting recently. The Food Truck Association is comprised of food truck owners exclusively, and it's an industry association that is meant to represent the best interest of those owners. We had a meeting this past Monday and spent the good part of 2 hours talking about the pilot program, reviewing it in detail. And some of the concerns we have is that it will create a situation that's really too risky for the established businesses that we have in our organization. These are businesses that have been out on the streets now for a long period of time, and they have places to go. They're in demand, as you know. And Matt alluded to this a little earlier. It's a lot easier to plan when you know you have a spot, and you can open up and you can sell, and it's a lot easier to communicate to your customer, too. It's very difficult to communicate to a customer if you don't know if you're going to get a spot or not. So that's a challenge. The fact that it's first come, first serve with the public and push carts and ice cream trucks and trailers and all that competition, it just lessens the chance of getting a spot. So a solution to that would be, if it's not too late, prior to the launch of this pilot program, it seems like we've got a lot of time to get this done, is to open it up a little bit more, to widen the net. And I think you would see that you get a lot more participation from these trucks that are well-established trucks, that have good brands, good business models, good operators, good people working them, have good customer bases. And if the net widens a little bit more, I think you'll see more participation there. We'd also like to work with you in the capacity of, down the line, maybe coming up with some sort of system where there is an allocatable system or a system where we can make reservations in advance, so we could put them on our calendar. Hey, we're going to be here at this point in time, because everybody posts on their website, typically Twitter, Facebook. Some of us have email listings and so on and so forth, and our customers look for that. It's like going to grandma's house looking for the ravioli and she's not even home. You're looking for it 6 months. I want grandma's ravioli. You get to her house and she's not even there. I mean, that's not good for the consumer. So some of the other things that came up quickly is the background checks. We feel like we're like restaurants, just like McDonald's is. McDonald's wouldn't be required to run background checks necessarily. Also, with the parking limit, LA does not require a length on its trucks. They can take up 2 spaces, so maybe there's a situation where we could look to allow longer trucks to take up and pay for 2 metered spaces. And what has happened in the situation where you've had kind of a free-for-all for spaces, you do kind of get this black market criminal element to it, where this has happened in other cities where people will take up those spaces and they'll hold you up for it. They'll wait for the trucks to get there, and then they'll say, hey, $50 and I'll move my car, and you can have this space. It's happened in other cities across the country with this type of format. I think that's it. Sorry for rambling on. Thank you again for all your work, and we look forward to working with you in the future as well.
Okay, thank you, and it's good to see you, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. Your concerns is that there's an inability to plan because of the competition and notifying folks. And I believe when we were out on the tour, I raised the question of what is the notification and the customer base contact, and I asked a lot of the food truck owners, how do they do that? And there's a scheduling and how all that work out. So I have some sense of what you're describing as a challenge. But again, widening the net, is that meaning more parking spaces when you say widening the net? Or you're saying in terms of the allowance of who parks there?
Yeah, just flat out more parking spaces. So maybe it's like all of the central business district, for example, in the pilot program. Just as an example.
And the system reservation is the signing up for a particular space and having a reservation for a space.
Yeah, and that's, sorry.
Oh, okay.
More
and
of a
the length
longer term
restrictions you think are limiting? Is that what, just so I understand?
Correct.
Okay. And I think the extortion comment was brought up earlier, and I apologize that I did not respond to the earlier speaker related to it, but that's not legal to sell our public spaces to someone. So that's something that we would like to hear about and to be reported. Okay? Thank you for coming down, and I appreciate your comments and all of the education you've given me along this time. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, I have Mikey Saboro. If you would please state your first and last name and any organization that you may represent.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mike Saboro, and I own Mikey's Late Night Slice, both of our food trucks, and a few of locations. Thank you, firstly, for hearing us speak tonight. It's definitely appreciated, and thank you, Council, for all your hard work on the pilot program. I think it's going to be very positive for Columbus. I wanted to share, firstly, a brief success story that we've had. As my truck manager, Joe, mentioned, we've been parking on the street in front of Level Dining Lounge for the better part of 3 years now. The truck was one of the first things that we ever did. The truck was kind of what started Late Night Slice. Just recently, we've been able to hire our 45th employee. So nice. That truck has led to 9 locations now and almost 50 employees. So I do think the food truck industry is very important. It's a great Kickstarter. It has been for us. 2 of the concerns I had with the pilot program, as people have actually said before, is the restricting of the parking spaces being sharing the space with the public, and as well as the food trucks. As far as the extortion goes, I don't know if that's going to be much of a problem, although it may be a possibility of one. But I think what it's going to lead to is a lot of the parking in those spaces being taken up by people that they weren't necessarily intended for. I know if we have to really want to secure ourselves a spot, we may go park our car down there for maybe the entire day. And I think that was what the Short North Alliance was very concerned about with the restriction of bagging meters. They didn't want us to do that, and understandably, because those spots don't want to be bagged the whole day where people can't park there and go shop in the shops around there. So I'm just worried that if it's a first come, first served basis, we may come down and it may create a situation where there's just cars parked there as placekeepers. So I definitely think that should be considered with spots. I think if there was some kind of reservation system, even a special bag to the meter that says no parking after, maybe free parking. If you want to bag the meter, I'll pay for it. Free parking up until 10 o'clock, no parking from 10 to 3, food trucks only, something like that. Also wanted to bring up briefly part about the carts being able to park on the street. I think this is primarily a food truck centric item, and having the carts on the streets, the carts really, I think, at this point have freedom to go almost wherever they can go. They're made to go on sidewalks predominantly, so I think maybe having this be a specifically food truck pilot program may be beneficial as well. And that was it.
Okay, thank you. I, again, try to give everyone their full 3 minutes. So the concerns that you have is the sharing of spaces with the public, the other residents and businesses, because you realize that that cuts off the opportunity for the surrounding businesses to have parking for their customers. If we do engage in the bagging and food truck only spaces, that interrupts other businesses. And again, trying to work towards an equitable solution is going to be a challenge. Wanting to be supportive of food trucks and their success, but impeding on the others is a challenge. So we're trying to work out something equitable. And if we double the number of parking spaces, I would imagine that a gallery full of residents and so on and so forth, particularly in challenge parking areas that are already challenged, such as the Short North, we would have a challenge upon our residents, and those are the same folks that you all are hoping to be customers, I would imagine. And so making sure that there's some comfort with the surrounding businesses and residents, I think benefits all. The happier they are, the more they'll eat from the trucks and the other restaurants, because we don't want them boycotting because of those kind of things, because then that interrupts your success. So again, we are really working hard at an equitable solution, but it will be a toughie. I heard the system reservation comment before that you've also made, and then the cart. I'm going to ask Assistant Director Ford to give some more clarity about the sidewalk allowances for the carts.
As far as the push carts go, you know, obviously in their lottery areas, they're only allowed to park or put their cart on the sidewalk in the lottery areas. I know the Short North, I think they may have one lotteried spot. Is it gone? No. Okay. So it's not a lottery spot. The biggest issue with the Short North is the reality is the sidewalks aren't large enough because they still have to maintain the 5-foot clearance for ADA requirements. So that's one of the issues with the Short North and why it's not. I think there used to be spots there, but they've, you know, phased them all out. So I understand the issue about, you know, they should be excluded, but we felt like to see if this is going to work. And we've met with the push cart owners, and they don't have a huge interest in parking in those spots. And I realize the concern is, you know, what happens if this gains some interest in it. But, you know, they feel like it's a safety issue for them. But we felt like, you know, they're wanting more spaces just as food trucks want more places. So it's trying to accommodate both.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
I want to thank you again for coming down and congratulate you on your success. And thank you as well as others who have decided to make Columbus their start of a great business, and you truly are a success story, and I thank you for choosing Columbus, and I hope we can continue to be business friendly so there are more success stories like you. So thank you very much for coming down, and I want to encourage you and others to not let this be the last time that we hear from everyone because of tonight's hearing, but the continual feedback will help us and keep us informed. Thank you again. I have Mike Renner. If you would please approach the podium, state your first and last name. You have 3 minutes to speak to council related to mobile food vendor pilot program.
Good evening, council. Thank you for hearing me. My name is Mike Renner. I currently serve on the Short North Alliance Board of Directors. I am an active member of the Italian Village Society and own a small business within the Short North Special Improvement District. I would like to speak out against the proposed food truck pilot program in its current form. My main objection is the use of public meters. Public parking in the Short North is at a premium. Allowing food trucks to do business at even a handful of these metered locations puts unnecessary stress on the current system. I understand that the suggested plan calls for a first-come, first-serve allocation of spaces. I believe this approach to be ripe for abuse. Although food truck operators are not allowed to lay claim to priority or preferred access to spaces, I can foresee a situation in which trucks could systematically work together or with individuals to rotate trucks and or personal vehicles so that the general public is essentially squeezed out of the opportunity to park at these meters. Also, without the enforcement of the 3-hour time limit on most Short North that exists on most Short North metered spaces, and throughout the city for that matter, a food truck operator could lay claim to a spot for an unspecified amount of time. We may also see brick and mortar businesses occupy the spaces with their own vehicles to block potential competition from mobile vendors. In addition, without any prior record of which food trucks use which spaces at which times, the ability to monitor bad actors for issues such as grease droppings, increased litter, and excessive noise is severely compromised. These plausible scenarios, or any variation thereof, is likely to create tension within the community, where instead the pilot should foster an increased sense of community. If the city decides to go ahead with the program at meters, I would suggest that food trucks face all the same restrictions and limitations as visitors to the Short North, including time limits. I would also suggest that the locations proposed be amended. The allocation of 2 spaces on East Warren seems to put an unfair hardship on existing brick and mortar businesses on that block. Also, the number of spaces south of First Avenue is entirely disproportionate to the length of the district. Even without considering that parking is much less of a challenge in the north end of the district, it would make the most sense to better distribute locations so that the entire district participates in the pilot program. Thank you.
And just so I understand, when you say entire district, entire Short North district?
The entire Short North district,
okay.
Yes. Yeah, the district runs even from the convention center all the way up to 7th Avenue, where Kroger is located. And my business happens to be between 4th and 5th on High Street, which I'd say north of 1st, even north of 2nd Avenue, that end of the district tends to be forgotten. I think parking is definitely easier within that area and can definitely accommodate more parking for food trucks if the program continues as is.
And I have two other questions,
Sure.
so that I make sure I understand your concerns. The reservations. So others have talked about the reservations that benefit their ability to plan and the success of their business. The reservations that you're speaking of would allow everyone to make reservations. Is that your suggestion? So the residents and the food trucks, just so that I understand, when you comment on reservations, are you sharing the comments of the others, or is that something different?
Actually, I was speaking to the 3-hour time limit for meters. Any visitor to the Short North or any various meters throughout the city, they're required to move their vehicle after 3 hours. They're not allowed to plug in any more quarters, and could result in a ticket. So I feel that anybody parked at those meters should face the same restrictions.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I heard you say so people would know when they're coming and when they're not.
No.
Just okay.
Visitors to the Short North in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again for coming down. I think I've captured what you shared, the first come, first serve, and how if we don't know who's where, when, then we can't sort of identify bad actors. I'm hoping the license number will help us identify who's where, and when someone sees something like grease droppings or any of those other things, not picking up trash, not having a receptacle, that's required that we receive those comments through the email, and that they will accurately take down the decal number so that we'll know how to identify if someone is violating the rules and restrictions of the pilot program.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Peter Niswander. If you would please approach the podium, share your first and last name, and I apologize again if I have mispronounced your name, but your first and last name. You have 3 minutes to address council related to mobile food vendor pilot program.
My name is Peter Niswander. Everyone mispronounces it. It's okay. I'm a Clintonville resident. I also own a small business in Clintonville and am part of the Chamber of Commerce. This is more, I guess, mundane than some of the other comments, but most of the unmetered spaces in Clintonville, I don't believe there are any metered spaces in Clintonville as far as I can recall, but most of the spaces in Clintonville, especially between Arcadia and Oakland Park, are 2-hour limits during business hours. And even though I'm a business owner, I would love to see an expansion of Clintonville's food scene generally. And my question was, has there been any consideration of expanding that time frame for food truck owners, possibly doubling it from 2 hours to 4 hours so that they would have more time to park in a particular spot, which would maybe give them more incentive to be in the neighborhood? I don't think we've seen any particular proposals for certain spots in the Clintonville area, but definitely the busiest uptown, downtown area, whatever you want to call it, of Clintonville is in that space and does have a 2-hour limit for the spaces.
And you're speaking about that you don't see any metered spaces identified in the pilot for Clintonville?
No, I know that there are proposed spaces, but I can't even think of any metered spaces in that section in Clintonville. So
and
they would
could you give me the parameters again?
Roughly Arcadia to Oakland Park, maybe another street north or so, are all 2-hour limited unmetered spaces during business hours, which I believe is
2-hour metered, right?
Unmetered, 2-hour unmetered, I'm sorry.
So the meters that are there are 2-hour limit meters?
No meters at all.
The permit parking?
Correct.
Okay.
It's not permit parking. I'm sorry. It's just during business hours. There's a 2-hour limit.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just
my
want to
apologies.
make sure that's okay. Okay. And you're encouraging increased limits to encourage food trucks in your neighborhood?
Yes, that's exactly right. I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know what some of the other business owners would think about that, but I would love to see an expansion of food trucks in Clintonville, and I think that would be helpful for them.
Okay, thank you for coming down. It is good to hear community will in the neighborhoods that we're considering, so that we know that there is welcoming from that neighborhood, because it's always good to have that, not just for the pilot program, but for the success of the food truck. They're welcome, they can be successful. Unwelcome may not be so successful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for coming down. Our last speaker for the evening is Paul Humphrey. If you would please approach the podium, state your first and last name, and share any organizations that you may represent. You have 3 minutes to speak to council related to mobile food vendor pilot program.
Good evening. My name is Paul Humphrey. I own Leslie's Creperie. We're a crepe cart and a truck. So I kind of bring what I feel is a little different perspective, since I've seen both the push cart and the truck operate. First off, thank you for allowing us to speak this evening. Also, thank you for being proactive from a city standpoint. I think Columbus, by putting together a pilot program, has moved quite a bit ahead of a lot of other cities who've had issues with, like people have mentioned, concerns about the openness of this type of setup. I do think that, as much as we don't want to think that that's what's going to happen, I do think it opens a door for it. The one thing I wanted to touch about was, one, the size restriction from a public safety standpoint. That's something that I understand just from a push cart standpoint, because the push carts are regulated. We're not allowed to be on brick, we're not allowed to be on granite, and certain other areas of sidewalks. The one thing that came up that I heard over and over from people was that they want to have a consistent spot. They want to be able to reserve that spot. One thing a push cart is allowed to do, we're not allowed to set up in front of a storefront unless we have a written letter of permission from that store owner. We started setting up, I think, in Grandview outside of the Twisted Vine wine shop. So we have a letter on file that gives us permission to do that. So you had mentioned earlier, Councilwoman, that you want feedback and you want to have some exploratory work done by the food truck owners. Is there, first off, I guess, a possible way to implement some type of system where, as independent food truck owners, if we seek out the business owners that would be affected for a particular parking meter, if we're able to get that meter, submit that application during the pilot program to develop more spots, and we're going and doing the legwork, I guess, of making sure that that business owner is okay with us being there. So is there a way during the pilot program that we can submit applications or a petition for a spot? That's the first question. And then that's really the biggest thing, is that I do think that it's gonna breed a not positive environment for food trucks and that business area to flourish. As I think one restaurant owner said, if they're fighting for spots, that's going to affect his patio. Definitely agree with that. So I'd like to see if maybe opening it up to us seeking out spots would increase participation. And then also, I think it would allow the trucks that are over 25 feet to seek out spots that could accommodate them, and then go speak with the local business owners and then submit it to public safety. So that was just kind of what I was thinking along the lines, and pretty much the biggest concern was the openness of it. So I just wanted to have that be heard. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure that I understand you correctly. You talked about it opening the door to, I didn't get the end
as
of
far
that.
as opening the door to, me having two buddies go park their cars down overnight so that I can be there in the morning and taking those parking spots up. And if you're in the area like a Short North and someone's doing that overnight, or parking at 10 o'clock at night the night before or something, it doesn't breed a very hospitable type of environment in my mind. Because this is a business, we do need to make money, and we are competitive. So, with the first come, first served basis, I think it does open up a lot of issues. I know there's documented issues with cart owners outside of places setting up next to each other, causing issues. And I wouldn't want to see that occur with the food truck industry.
Okay, and I want you to know that the fighting in that among the folks in the mobile food industry was something we discussed at the stakeholders meeting. We're not naive into thinking that that may or may not occur. We have to start somewhere, as I'm sharing with everyone, and trying to work out an equitable solution. We're asking for the cooperation up front. So these unfair practices of monopolizing the spot, and that will help us, because if the food truck industry does that within its own self, it's going to hurt its own permanent legislation. So not to be cooperative or fair is only going to inform us that maybe this can't work in spaces, and that really hurts the trucks. So the cooperation is what's going to make the legislation more friendly. But if there is those type of unfair practices and we say, well, this doesn't work because it's causing all kind of disturbances, that in itself will inform permanent legislation to say that the public sidewalks are not a fair place to be because of this type of behavior is going to happen. That creates a safety issue for us. And as I said in the onset, the number one goal is the public safety and the regard of others around. And so if those unfair practices, and I know that everyone keeps thinking they're going to happen, my thought is to talk to your fellow food truck owner and say, hey, when this behavior happens, it hurts all of us, because if we get that feedback, that tells us that this may not be a fair way to do this, or that we can allow food trucks to be on our public streets because of the fighting. So again, we're asking for the cooperation because we don't want to hear that feedback, and we don't want to make decisions or permanent legislation that does not support the food truck industry, but we need the buy-in and the cooperation to making it work. So I'm going to ask again for the cooperation, because all that does is tells us that it won't work to have food trucks on our public streets. That's what it'll tell us. It won't tell us that we bred it, we fed it. It will be about the fact that we had a lot of fighting and that going on our public streets, interrupting public safety. Again, the number one goal is to make sure that we maintain public safety. I also want to make sure that you had a comment or concern about the length restrictions as well, and the seeking the permission of the businesses in terms of them allowing the food truck or the cart to park in front of their business and obtaining that permission. And what I wanted to say to you on that point is that we're not limiting any feedback. So if you've seen it work and you think it works and that has worked, sharing that helps us know that it could work. So we're not limiting the feedback. Are we interested in hearing that? Yes. I'm not limiting any feedback that you share with me. I won't say that you sought that out and explored. We're not listening. Whatever feedback you can have and send to us, we will take it all in and try to balance it with safety. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thanking everyone for coming down and giving their not only comments, but some offering solutions to assist us as we move forward in making legislation, again, with the number one goal of safety, and moving forward with legislation that supports the industry and all those impacted. It is not the last time that we will hear from stakeholders. We will continue to keep our ears open, continue to move forward with the information that we heard this evening. As you all can imagine, we'll be in huddle over the next couple of days, trying to take in what we've heard and figure out what are some of the things we can adjust and allow for equitable solutions. And so we have heard you. We have taken many, many notes. We will take back all of the comments, because we don't want you to just come and think that it's all falling on deaf ears. We will do the best we can while achieving our goal of public safety. So thanks to everyone for coming this evening to the hearing, as well as our viewing audience. We are certainly looking to pass legislation soon that will suspend traffic codes that will actually allow the pilot to exist by the end of the month. Again, with some adjustments we may make after tonight's hearing and hearing your comments. Again, as I mentioned earlier, your cooperation and participation is what will make the pilot program effective. An effective pilot program will make for effective legislation. An effective pilot program will make for effective legislation. So I'm looking for the participation, looking to hear from everyone so that we can have effective and good legislation going forward. Again, I hope that everyone remains engaged during the entirety of the pilot program. We will have separate stakeholder meetings and open that up to all, but please encourage everyone, including your customers, to share feedback through that email address about locations and all of those things. These check-in meetings will take place in July and October, so we can hear how things are going and compare the data that we're having, which will also include, as I want to remind folks, complaints or concerns raised by law enforcement, keeping in mind that the cooperative behavior, the things that may happen that are unfair, illegal, and all of that will play into our decisions related to the outcome of the pilot program and the eventual legislation. We will collect data about the number of times our police have had to respond to issues and concerns related to this, because that is a drain on our public resources, and we try to be good stewards of the public's resources, and our law enforcement is a tremendously wonderful resource to our city's safety. And so we want to make sure that everyone understands that those number of runs and all of that will also be taken in consideration along with the data and feedback that we receive from the public. Again, we want to make sure that businesses stay engaged and understand the strengths and weaknesses of the pilot program. We know that the pilot program is not perfect. We know that it will give us some sense of what will work as well as what won't work, what will interrupt parking, what will impact and have consequences on others, not just food trucks, push carts, or anyone else in the mobile food vendor program, but also those around us, because we all need to live harmoniously and also support each other in terms of success. If you have any additional comments or questions, please feel free to contact my office. And again, thanking everyone for their participation and thanking you in advance for your cooperation during the pilot program so we can have an effective program for effective legislation. Thank you all and have a good evening.